Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Genevieve L. Gologar, your rapporteur in Language Learning Design and Resource Management. For today's video, I am going to discuss about developing motivating materials for refugee children from theory to practice. So these are the objectives of today's discussion. 1. Explicate the term refugee students and how they cope up with the situation. 2. Discuss the role of the teachers during these emergencies and how education systems promote the integration of refugee children and youth. And 3. Elaborate the guidelines and principles in drafting or developing motivating materials for refugee students. Education is recognized as a universal human right across a range of international legal frameworks. Several international treaties outline the right to education for refugees. Now, who is considered as a refugee? Refugees are called as asylum seekers, people in need of protection, or in broader term, they are called as humanitarian migrant. The term refugee refers to people who have successfully applied for asylum and have been granted refugee protection. The 1951 Geneva Convention and its 1967 Protocol defines a refugee as a person who, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or a political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, or who, not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence, is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to return to it. In other words, these are the people who ask or avail for protection to the other countries like in USA, Canada, Germany, and so with the other countries in order to get away or disappear from conflicts or any other humanitarian crisis that happened in their countries. The term asylum seekers are people who have formally applied for asylum but whose claim is pending. In practice, only a minority of asylum seekers are granted refugee or some other form of humanitarian migrant status, while the rest have to leave the country. On the other hand, humanitarian migrant refers to people who have successfully applied for asylum and have been granted some sort of protection, either it could be refugee or other status. Now, the terms refugee, people in need of protection, and humanitarian migrant are often used interchangeably according to OECD 2016, page 7. By definition, refugee students are defined as the target of repeated violence, discrimination, and trauma in their countries of origin according to the Capwas, Mathers, and Tang in 2007. In 2016, over 12 million children around the world were living as refugees or asylum seekers. Yet, the real number of children driven from their homes remains unknown and is likely to be significantly higher than the estimate because of gaps in reporting and data collection, according to OECD 2018. There are only few refugees experience school programs that provide resources to meet their unique psychosocial, academic, and developmental needs, according to IGWA 1995, ZOO 1997, Boyson and Short in 2003. Thus, refugee students face difficulty in their transition to public schools, for example, if they are in the United States, due to lack of familiarity with the English language, according to Guerrero 2004, unresolved trauma and stress disorders, and an absence of academic counseling support services. And for this reason, The integration of refugee children in education systems is important for their academic outcomes as well as their social and emotional well-being. The success or lack of integration in schools can also affect the future labor market and social integration potential of these children. Now, the big question is, how can countries and education systems promote the integration of refugee children and youth? While there is a growing body of research on the integration of immigrants, policy-relevant research on refugee children, according to Rutter, he claims that this has resulted in a one-sided way of understanding the situation of refugee children and their families, placing a strong focus on trauma experience. Bonin goes further by stating that as the current situation is basically without precedent, the existing empirical research provides a rather weak basis for inferring what could work best to support educational development of this target group of learners. However, this research on previous crises, particularly on the needs of refugee children and the policies that countries have implemented, can bear some lessons for the current crisis. So, refugee education refers to education in camps, introductory classes, or long-term provisions. Teachers are the ones who will teach the students in camps and introduce new lessons with regards to their level of learning. Since most of the refugees came from the countries of Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and other countries in Asia, refugee students have been often treated as a homogeneous group, which has prevented detailed examinations of pre-migration and post-migration factors, according to McBreen in 2005. These are relevant for understanding the particular needs of refugee students and developing appropriate educational support, according to Rutner in 2006. Refugees will also respond to school and their new environment differently, depending on a variety of individual and contextual factors, including country of origin, race, ethnicity, religion, culture, and socioeconomic and educational background before migration. Other important factors that we also consider are also the age at the time of flight, migration and resettlement, personality characteristics, and the level of family support and sustenance, according to Caprillian Churchill in 1996. Now, what are the roles of teachers in education during these emergencies? Since teachers are the best instruction materials for the eyes of the students, they provide a source of continuity and normality for children, attending to their physical, cognitive, and social needs. Second, their direct work with children and their families is critical in helping restore a sense of stability and confidence. In addition, teachers can help support recovery and transition post-conflict in after emergencies and can promote security, peace, and human rights, both in their home countries upon return and in host countries where they may stay indefinitely. Indeed, teachers can have an immense influence on refugee children's learning. Education can both enhance and hinder conflict, as can teachers. Now, according to the study conducted by Irma Karina Gazan, there are 4 principles in drafting or developing motivating materials for refugee students. The first one is instructed second language learning principles. Second, learner attention and motivation. Third, the use of the language. And the last is learner success and satisfaction. Now let's start with the first principle, which is instructed second language learning principles. And these are divided into 4 categories. First, we have formulaic chunks of language. Second, the focus on meaning and form. Third, second language input and learner output. And the last one is meaningful verbal interaction. According to Rod Ellis in 2008, instruction should enable learners to develop a rich repertoire of formulaic expressions and rule-based competence. He also suggests that formulaic expressions may serve as a basis for the later development of a rule-based competence. The second one is the focus ought to be on meaning, but without forgetting focus on form. And instruction should focus on learners developing implicit knowledge of the second language while not neglecting the explicit knowledge. The importance also of extensive input has long been recognized as important in second language learning because it is the central to develop second language proficiency. One learns how to do conversation, one learns how to interact verbally, and out of the interaction, syntactic structures are also developed according to Hatch 1978, page 404. Ellis also suggests that sufficient input can be ensured by maximizing second language use inside the classroom and making the second language as a medium as well as the object of instruction. And that creates verbal interaction to the classroom in which students are very much challenged to use the second language in any form of interaction. The second guideline is the learner's attention and motivation, and this is being divided into two. We have potential for situational interest, and the second one is potential for relevance. In potential for situational interest, it is subdivided into four. We have the novelty of content, identifiability with content or characters by target population, saliency of information, and the last is level of activity. While in the potential for relevance, we have a home experience, classroom experience, community experience, and cultural experience. Now, to get learners' attention and engage them in the lessons, situational interests like the authenticity or the novelty of the content, salience of language in the initial stage are achieved with the inclusion of big book stories set in familiar contexts and featuring highly contextualized language and repetitive refrains. Level of activities or activities to be included in this situational interest are choral reading, songs, games, use of puppets, and dramatizations that will provide high level of activity during the lessons. On the other hand, relevance is also achieved by presenting content that is familiar to the learners, like situations or experiences that happen in homes, classrooms, community, or their cultural experiences. For example, in your material, the lessons should focus on family experiences, which it features homes, furniture, and clothing that look more familiar to the children. Another thing is important events like fiesta celebrations, religious celebrations, in which it actually happened in the community as well. One thing also that is very important, since at these initial stages, children will form their first impressions about English lessons with the contextualization or integration of the experiences that happened in their surroundings. The next guideline is the criteria for successful language learning materials. A number of criteria have been proposed by Richard Amato in 1988, in which materials should reflect topics that are interesting and relevant in learners' lives. These are the following. Materials should present meaningful and logical discourse and focus on meaningful communication as opposed to language itself. Second, integrate the four language skills, which are listening, reading, speaking, and writing. Third is the importance of volume and repetition of language input and output for learners. And the last is the level of difficulty. In addition, Watt and Faskolas in 1998 stressed the importance of volume and repetition of language input and output for learner success. Learners need to be exposed in the target items sufficiently many times within a given activity for learning to happen. Nelson in 1995 reminds materials developers to consider learners' culture to ensure materials are culturally appropriate and meaningful. Tomlinson in 2003 further argues that language teaching materials need to be humanizing, taking into account learners' experience of life, their interests and enthusiasms, their views and attitude and feelings, and above all, their capacity to make meaningful connections in mind. Finally, Gosson in 2012 points out that primary school language teaching materials must take into account the holistic development of the young learner, who is still developing not only linguistically but also cognitively and psychosocially. The last principle is the learner success and satisfaction. This includes the types of activities to be employed in the learning material. We have the difficulty level of tasks, difficulty level of assessment tasks, reinforcement, and the last is developmental appropriateness of content or activities. Materials developers should also consider the level of difficulty of the tasks to be included in the material, because this is based on the capacity of the learners on how they are going to cope up or answer the activities provided. Learners can respond with gestures and actions, with one or two word utterances, or speak in longer phrases or sentences when ready. Another is the assessment tasks should be primarily open rather than closed yes, no, or multiple choice types. There should be alternative assessments to be included so that in this way, the presentation of activities and assessment tasks should be developmentally appropriate and gradually increasing in difficulty according to the level of the students. Extrinsic reinforcement is built in by inclusion of activities celebrating the completion of units. In summary, when developing language learning materials for children living in challenging life situations, one must take into account the home, school, and community experience of children in order to ensure interest, motivation, and ultimate success. Materials must also foster learner confidence in themselves as learners by presenting age-appropriate language at the right level of difficulty. And finally, consideration is given to the development of children's academic literacy in English, where this is relevant by including subject matter-related topics. It is my hope that learner success and satisfaction will continue to be achieved also in the later grades amid the difficulty or predicament that they have experienced. And that ends my report. I hope you learned something new in my discussion today. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you will be more updated on my channel. Thank you and God bless.